Welcome to Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Kevin Gray, Mavs pre- and post-game host here. Appreciate you joining me, however, and wherever you may be listening to us, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, or if you're watching this video on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, be sure to download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. So excited for my guest today. It's NBA trade deadline time, and this man is very busy right now covering all things for the league, getting the latest trade intel all across the league and for your Dallas Mavericks as well. Joining me here on Inside the Mavs today, he is the author of Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever, and host of the Ball Don't Lie podcast for Yahoo Sports. He is NBA insider for Yahoo Sports. Jake Fischer joining me on the podcast today. Jake, what's going on?
How you doing, Kevin? Thanks for that intro, man. Very, very kind. Thank you.
I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit as everyone around this time of the year, we're less than a month away from the NBA trade deadline, and there's a lot of conversation in and around the league. And let's just jump in because for the Mavericks, we've heard reporting that they want to upgrade the power forward position, maybe try to find some wing help as well. Where has the intel gathered for you been when it comes to this Mavericks team and what they're looking to maybe do when we get to the February 8th trade deadline?
Yeah, my understanding is very similar. I think by all accounts, the pairing between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving has been as good as advertised, as seamless as the Mavericks were hoping when they're both on the court and healthy. And Derek Lively, of course, has really been one of the standout rookies and been the lob threat and the rim protector that Luka has kind of needed since he got to Dallas, and Kristaps Porzingis didn't turn out to be that guy. So the missing piece is between those bookends of your lineup are on the perimeter, on the wings, at the forward spots. It's only natural, I think, for Dallas to try to look to upgrade at those positions. So that's why you're hearing them involved with the Pascal Siakam stuff at like the top of the list. But I think smaller names too, someone like Andrew Wiggins in Golden State, not a small name. I mean, he was the second best player on a championship team not too long ago. But those types of players, I think, are exactly the types of players that are going to be that Mavs fans are going to be hearing between now and February 8th.
And let's start there because Siakam is the name, as you mentioned, at the top of the list for a lot of Mavericks fans and folks who want to see this team improve. How real is that with the Mavericks in terms of their interest and what it may take to try and get a Pascal Siakam to Dallas, knowing that what we've heard that he may want to ensure that wherever he goes, he's going to sign an extension to be there beyond not just this year, but beyond that?
Yeah, I think the interest is real. I think conversations have been had between the two teams. How legitimate of an outcome it can be definitely remains to be seen. And to your point about the financial complications, I think that's going to apply to any single team that's going to ask and inquire and potentially trade for Pascal Siakam, being that he, by all accounts, doesn't have any real intention to sign an extension upon being traded with any team, being that you'd only be limited to a 2-year framework in that situation after being traded so briefly before his contract expires. And he's going to be an unrestricted free agent this summer, where he will finally have full control basically to test that open market and get a big payday, just like his former teammate Fred VanVleet did a year ago. So I think from my conversations, his side of the equation, his representation are very confident that when he reaches the open market, he's going to have max money, top dollar waiting for him, just like Fred VanVleet had. And if that's the case, why limit yourself to a 2-year extension with the team that you could be traded to? And if that's the case, then why should a team that could trade for you sacrifice, if it's Dallas's thinking, like, why should the Mavericks give up Josh Green and Jaden Hardy and Tim Hardaway Jr.? I'm not saying that's the specific package, but if you look at what Toronto ultimately took back for OG Anunoby, who was in a similar boat, he has a player option, but he by all accounts is going to decline that and was going to reach the open market. And I think his situation is more wrapped up now that he's with New York. But you bring it back to Pascal, like OG brought Toronto RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley. And I think objectively, the Mavericks don't have those types of players on their roster. So I think it would be hard for the Mavs to consider giving those guys up, the Josh Greens, the Jaden Hardys, if you're not convinced or sure that Pascal's going to stick around. But also, I don't know if those players are, and I don't know if the Mavs really do have a package that is going to whet the Raptors' appetite. That being said, if no one else is willing to put that on the table for him because of those same financial fears, maybe Dallas does end up being the team. Maybe it is Sacramento or Indiana, but one of these teams that's in the fold could end up getting Pascal for the lower price point that they're willing to put out now. That Toronto was saying, relatively speaking, across all these conversations, no, we want more. Maybe come February 8th, the bar ends up getting lowered and it's more tenable for a team to process that potential rental of Pascal.
It's interesting because the Mavericks were in a similar situation when they decided to go after Kyrie Irving. Obviously, the situation a little bit different in terms of what Brooklyn was dealing with in the relationship with Kyrie, but the point remains the same. You would be trading for a guy that you're hoping re-signs with you in the ensuing offseason, but you're still going to give up assets to have to do so in order to acquire him. I wonder if the Mavericks, based on your perspective, would feel like going down that road again, given the fact that they just did this to acquire Kyrie Irving in a similar fashion.
Yeah, it's a great point, being that if Kyrie Irving was on the trade market at full valuation, he wouldn't be in Dallas right now. That's just the brass tacks of it. And the Mavericks got an all-star caliber player who is absolutely playing at that level right now that he's healthy and back, for one first-round pick. And obviously, Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie are legitimate postseason contenders, and maybe Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy they could come back and trade for right now. He's definitely a name that's out there on the market of defensive-minded wings, 3-4s that, talk about former Mavericks coach Rick Carlisle in Indiana. The Pacers are another team looking for defensive-minded 4 men. He could be an option there too. I think, to bring it back to the price point, sometimes the best move is actually the most opportunistic move when it just presents itself. I mean, at this point right now, last season, no one was thinking about Kyrie Irving being on the trade block or being available. And then we woke up one day on a Friday and his attempts to get a contract extension that he wanted with Brooklyn fell short for the last time, and he forced his way out, and he got to Dallas by the end of the weekend, right? So something could happen like that changes things at any point in time. And as it brings back to Pascal, maybe Dallas is able to do it twice. Maybe Thunder and Lightning can strike twice for Dallas, where you can get. Pascal at his peak when the shots fallen, he's a 2-time All-NBA selection. So it would, and the calculus there is also bringing him in puts Dallas right next to Denver and LA with the top tier of all-star collection talents that you have in the Western Conference. So I see the logic. It's just going to be a matter of if the math and if the negotiations can all check out.
What are some other names that may be not necessarily at the top when it comes to Pascal Siakam that may be more of a realistic opportunity when it comes to the Mavericks looking for coveted 4 men who can shoot and can defend? Are there some names that are on another tier that the Mavericks could be more realistically in play for?
I said Andrew Wiggins earlier. Jonathan Kuminga is a different side of this coin, being that super young, hasn't been playoff tested. But I think if you're calling around and just looking at options, his name is absolutely going to be out there right now with everything going on in Golden State. And I'm expecting the Warriors to make a move. It does seem like there's a bit of synergy, let's say, from my understanding, between Golden State and Dallas's front office. So just something to keep an eye on. I haven't heard any other names directly for Dallas outside of the names you've mentioned. I said Dorian. I think just going off the top of my head of other forwards that are out there and other teams that are going to have guys available. I do wonder if Kyle Kuzma in Washington is something that is someone that Dallas would think about. He's not the defensive-minded 4-man that I think would really be the preferable outcome for the Mavericks. But if you just want to talk about top-tier talent of guys that are actually available, he might be up there in terms of like the best one you can go get at a relatively modest price point on his contract versus, Jeremy Grant to me would be like a really ideal outcome. And I just don't know right now from all my conversations. I don't think that Jeremy Grant is necessarily like for the taking at this juncture. He just signed that big deal in Portland, which I think is giving some teams a lot of sticker shock at the price point, roughly $35 million a year, I believe. And I think that from his standpoint, personally, Jeremy's a new father, and the Blazers don't have a ton of they're not thinking about this is going to be a years-long rebuild. Like, I think Portland does view Jeremy as someone that could be around for the kind of bridge point of this rebuild to when Portland is back into the spot where Houston is right now and Orlando is right now. So is Kyle Kuzma ultimately like the most gettable name of someone who does raise your ceiling there? Maybe, but like I was saying, I don't know if he would make so much sense in Dallas just from the defensive side of things.
Is someone like a PJ Washington in Charlotte, is that someone that maybe on another level that could be a realistic option given what he can bring from a skill set standpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. He's very, very malleable to the point where he could be the 4 next to Derek Lively and play some backup 5, which I know is another thing that Dallas is probably lacking more than they would like at this point. So certainly possible. The Hornets are going to be, I've been told, like uncharacteristically active. Like you don't see the Charlotte Hornets make, and we haven't seen them make really any trade deadline deals at all under Mitch Kupchak in his time running that organization. But there's new ownership in the fold right now. They still have the same leadership structure in place in that front office, but plenty of expectation that those decision makers won't be there for the long haul and that the Hornets are open for business. So, different side of like Gordon Hayward hasn't been able to prove that he's able to stay healthy, but another guy that he's a wing player that is absolutely for the taking, that I think on expiring contract has more likelihood than ever to get moved. That being said, because of the expiring, a lot of teams are also looking at Hayward as a buyout possibility. So a team like Dallas be wanting to send out $30 million in salary to match him, as opposed to someone like PJ who's younger, bigger, whatever. Yeah, I think PJ could be an interesting fit for the Mavericks, but I just haven't heard him linked to Dallas at this point.
When you're looking at buyers and sellers in this particular market this year, based off of what we've seen so far this season, who are some of those teams that maybe if the Mavericks maybe get involved as a third team in a trade that could be part of the situation like that?
Yeah. Atlanta's got plenty of wings. I don't see Sadiq Bey as like the defense improvement like we've been talking about, but the Hawks are absolutely going to be a seller, and I think they're looking at the landscape and the ability to be a seller in a market that doesn't have a ton. Where a couple weeks ago, almost a month ago now, when December 15th came around, Utah was supposed to be a seller, but now they've won 9 of 11, and
yeah.
It's going to be difficult to figure out exactly what the Jazz want to do for the time being that they have had all this success, and that losing streak that looked to be putting them out as a seller was when Larry Markkinen and others were out with injuries, and now that they're healthy, they're cooking down there. So I think Detroit is a team that's going to be very, very active, and we'll be looking at various avenues. Like they could be a buyer and a seller. San Antonio, Doug McDermott will be absolutely available for the taking. There's plenty of, I think, like 7th to 9th men that are going to be available from all the team. Washington has a bunch of guys that I think, in addition to Kuzma, Daniel Gafford, Tyus Jones, that a lot of teams will have interest in. That's kind of the general makeup right now of the sellers to me.
When you look at the perception of the Mavericks so far this season, what has been the conversation from, in your perspective, a national perspective, about where this team is headed, what they've been able to accomplish? You talked about a little bit earlier the surprise of Derek Lively and how well he's been playing when he's been on the floor. What's been that national kind of general perception of the Mavericks so far this season?
That the Mavs are good, that they're one of the teams that no one's going to want to face in the playoffs, because Luka Doncic is having an absolute MVP caliber season. Kyrie Irving is Kyrie Irving, and that's going to be a two-headed monster that if you catch them as a 7 seed, as a 2 seed, you're going to be pissed. And if they're a 2 seed and a 7 seed claws their way into the playoffs out of the play-in tournament, and they have to play Dallas, that's not going to be fun either. So, and that's how the Western Conference is shaping up. That right now, I mean, in both sides of the league, it's going to be really tightly bunched. I mean, the East is more struck where going into last night, I think you had 6 teams stuck at 21 games. And right now there's 4 games I'm looking separating Dallas at 7 between Oklahoma City at 2. So plenty of opportunity for a lot of movement across the board where all those matchups are going to be tough, and Dallas is supposed to factor in. I think it's expected to factor in as much as any team in that like second tier in the West. Like I don't think the Mavs are being considered in that Denver, Clippers, Minnesota at this point, like upper echelon. Even Oklahoma City, I think, is as dangerous as they have been, and as all the metrics are saying that they're in that top tier. I still think people around the league are a little bit skeptical of seeing these young kids advance deep in the playoffs before they've been there before.
Sure.
Dallas, I think Dallas is right in that mix of like OKC, Phoenix. You know, I mean, Phoenix has their own issues, but you know, from Sacramento to New Orleans, that whole like next group, they're right there, and that's why I think that one extra piece at the trade deadline could be a big thing for the Mavericks.
When you look at this team and the Mavericks in terms of what attractive pieces could be appealing for teams, what are the names based off of what you have been able to learn and you've observed from this team specifically that could be attractive pieces and players to possibly be a part of any kind of trade if one gets done for the Mavericks?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think there's a ton down this roster that Dallas wouldn't want to give up. Josh Green, I think, would have some appeal and will have some appeal just because he is young. His extension, while the poison pill will make that a little bit challenging, his extension is very, very, very not cumbersome for a team to take on. Tim Hardaway Jr. has played very well this season, and if you're looking for a shooter, if a team is looking for a shooter, it's going to be hard to find someone better than Tim Hardaway Jr. being that. He's able to do it off the dribble in ways that certain guys like Buddy Hield haven't exactly proven over their career. So I think there's a chance that a team with shooting would look at him as a nice return if they're sending out. You know, if it's another team like Dallas that's in the playoff mix that's maybe looking for different pieces back, like they have something that they have that defensive minded 4-man, for example, that Dallas would be looking for, but they're looking to upgrade shooting. I could see a team wrapping their arms around Tim Hardaway Jr., but I don't think he's going to be, and I don't think anyone really on Dallas's roster, to what we said earlier, is going to be viewed as like a marquee centerpiece name for a return for someone of real consequence. I mean, I know Dallas is definitely going to look to try to see what Rashawn Holmes' salary can help them get, but to that point, I mean, the Kings were looking to move him for quite a while before they were able to basically trade him for a first-round pick or with a first-round pick to Dallas. So I don't know if he's going to be. I don't think he's going to be considered like a value play by any stretch.
I want to ask you real quick about this player because obviously the Mavericks' biggest quote unquote free agent signing that they had was getting Grant Williams from Boston. What has been your perception about the way that he's played so far and what the conversation has been around him, given what he's done so far for the Mavericks this year?
Yeah, I think if you ask some people in Boston who remember didn't give him the money that he wanted, who had him for 3 years, that there are limitations to Grant Williams' game. And I don't want to say too much, but that just the loud voice he has is a factor in a locker room compared to other guys. And that's not the easiest total package to incorporate into a new dynamic where you have loud personalities and voices already into the fold. So I don't think that the returns for Grant, and I think Mavericks fans are not surprised by me saying this, have been like as the Mavericks would have hoped. That's not to say that I think they're looking to shop him and move him out. But if we do start to hear his name pop up, I won't be surprised, just because I don't think that it's been as ideal of an outcome as the Mavericks were hoping for when they put together that sign and trade deal to take him from Boston.
Last thing before we get you out of here today, what is your overall perception of what now the Mavericks have gone through? They're 22-16 through 38 games before they continue toward the All-Star break, and what that means for any possible realistic trade scenarios that could be coming their way, given what they're looking for in this particular market.
Yeah, I would just say that this has been a front office under Nico Harrison that's always been opportunistic, as most evidenced by the Kyrie trade, like we talked about, and even going out and getting Grant and seeing that he was a sixth man on Eastern Conference Finals team year over year that was being undervalued by his current team, and they were able to get him at a very reasonable number. Like, I do think they're going to be active. I do think they're going to be very exploratory and trying to find out ways to improve this team, because there's a pretty good opportunity right now for any team in the East or in the West, excuse me, that has a real MVP caliber player in Luka Doncic and no real clear, obvious best team, as opposed to you look at the East. Boston has cemented themselves as the class of that conference. They've been to the finals of the conference year over year over year, the last almost half decade. They were just in the finals in 2022. And they, after the Porzingis and Drew Holiday additions, they look almost unbeatable. They've been unbeatable at home. In the West, it does seem like it's going to be much more of a slugfest. And the fact that you've got Luka and Kyrie, like we've been saying, why couldn't it be Dallas? And so with that, I think the Mavericks are going to really try to hit this hole that seems to be there. I mean, that's not to say it's going to be a cakewalk. It's the exact opposite. It's going to be really, really hard for any team to make their way out of the West this year. But that means it could be any team to do it. And why not the Mavs?
It's going to be a fun Western Conference to chronicle over the next several weeks as we get closer to the NBA trade deadline. Jake, thank you so much for the time. Sincerely appreciate it. And I know that you're a busy man with a lot of phone calls and making a lot of articles to put together. So I appreciate you hanging out with me for a little bit, giving us some perspective when it comes to the Mavs here on the Inside the Mavs podcast, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Take care.
That is Jake Fischer, author of the Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Make sure you check out that book and also his podcast, the Ball Don't Lie podcast, wherever you get podcasts for free. He does a terrific job covering the NBA for Yahoo Sports. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, really appreciate Jake Fischer of Yahoo Sports for joining me here on today's episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts for free on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And remember, Inside the Mavs is the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak. I'll talk to you next time. Peace.